A tsunami of collapse is coming to the European Union political crooks, the end of the TransAtlanticism. Written by German analyst Franz Ferdinand. As the recent speech by US Vice President J.D. Vance showed, the paradigm shift caused by the election of President Trump is truly radical. Trump is, as already mentioned, a kind of American Mikhail Gorbachev who represents glasnost, transparency, publicity, and perestroika, restructuring, reconstruction, restructuring. However, Trump is obviously not only interested in tearing down the intellectual walls of European Bolshevism that have been imposed on America and Europe, but he wants to create an open space for discussion, an open forum where there will be freedom of speech, freedom of the press. His approach to resolving the conflict in Ukraine will practically only be through bilateral talks between Russia and the US. This shows that he is already working towards a completely new world order in which the EU plays only a secondary role. The European Union, the EU, could join this new order, but it would first have to change policies, philosophy, and mentality. This approach, this line of thought, is also quite clear since for Trump, the orchestra's music is played in the Asia-Pacific region. The center of the world has shifted from Europe to China, India, and Russia. This is where most people live, the majority of the people of the entire planet, and there is the highest economic development and the most raw materials. There is dynamic economic growth without ideological blinders. Arteriosclerotic Europe, aging and decrepit, on the other hand, is in a phase of stagnation and moral decline due to the emergence of stupid and self-destructive political paradigms from which the USA has just freed itself by triumphantly electing Trump as its president. In addition to the green climate fraud and irrational energy transition, the illegal immigration policy has been self-destructive. Misunderstood human rights have made the EU a magnet for the entire world's lumberjack proletariat who came by steamers and boats from all over the world, jumping over border fences unguarded. And the popular saying becomes, "Come in dogs and grind not given." The result of this destructive policy is excessive increase in national debt and ultimately the misgovernance of several European countries. The EU is now on a development path similar to that of Latin America. That is, negative development. Instead of insight and economy, there's only arrogance and complete arrogant overestimation of itself. That is, complete hubris. And where there is hubris, insults, nemesis inevitably comes in the end. Today, Europe is nothing more than a caricature of itself, with European politicians traveling around the world trying to preach some false values to the world. Without offering anything else, they believe they can pose as the saviors of the world by constantly cursing everyone else about climate change and global warming, calling on them to adopt the madness of politics and wormwood to save the planet. Donald Trump sees China as his main rival in the emerging new multipolar world order that is taking shape in the world. He has long since abandoned the unipolar world of the Democrats with his America First policy. Therefore, it makes sense that he would seek Russia as a partner. Although Russia will not allow itself to be positioned against China, close cooperation with Russia also opens up many opportunities against China that would otherwise not be available. For example, Trump has already suggested that China, Russia, and the US could have their military budgets through a treaty, which makes perfect sense. Perhaps this proposal is similar to Otto Bismarck's 1815 to 1898, his Bismarck's Treaty of the Three Emperors, which was designed to secure peace in Europe in the 19th century. We can only hope that Trump will be more successful in this endeavor than Bismarck was. The status of Greenland can also be strengthened by these three powers. China has already defined itself as an Arctic coastal state. Of course, this strategy of Trump assumes that he will have to come up to an understanding and compromise with Russia, first of all. Trump may want in his back pocket his mind even to withdraw the US from NATO. Trump admitted in a telephone conversation with Putin that the attempt to bring Ukraine into NATO was a mistake. However, EU politicians are miles away from such a political approach and awareness. However, this awareness is a prerequisite for starting negotiations with Russia. Therefore, the end of the military conflict in Ukraine will be a matter of negotiation between the US and Russia, and only. In case the EU refuses to join this policy, Trump will find ways and means to bring his partners in NATO to their senses. Suddenly, some documents may suddenly see the light of day that will shed a lot of light on the real background of the conflict in Ukraine. Take, for example, the Minsk agreements, which former Chancellor Merkel said were concluded only to deceive Russia and buy time for its arming in Ukraine. As long as the EU, living in the nightmare of its megalomania, does not treat Russia as an equal, and Putin, because of this, will not negotiate with EU representatives. In any case, the EU will be humiliated to the bone, since the false narrative of Russia's supposedly aggressive war against Ukraine can no longer be maintained. Suddenly, the EU could find itself isolated in a corner on this issue, in which it invested so much, both the Europeans and political clown Zelensky. It's also significant, even symbolically, that Trump wanted to meet with Putin for peace talks in Saudi Arabia and not in Europe, because nowadays even Switzerland is no longer considered neutral. Neither European politicians nor Zelensky were invited. The American leaders were even invited to the victory parade in Moscow, May 9, 2025. If Trump really takes part in this parade, it would be a huge insult to the European Union. European leaders will not know where to hide. The USA is moving closer and closer to Russia, while it's rapidly moving away from Europe. The resulting loss of credibility of the EU elites will also have repercussions on other issues where the EU and EU politicians still dominate the European debate, for example, the climate crisis. This is exactly what the corrupt European elites fear, because it would lead to a massive loss of power for themselves. Even now, these political crooks can barely stay in power by ignoring the election results, as in Romania and Austria. Once the false narrative of Russia's alleged aggression and absurd green climate policy collapses, the Western systemic cartel parties, supposedly center-right and supposedly center-left, will collapse like a house of cards. They will be swept away by an unprecedented political tsunami. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support, and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.